Hello everybody, what a fantastic crowd today. This is the panel about fairies, or as I prefer to call them, elemental forces from other dimensions. I'm not going to do much speaking, hopefully, because we have the most fantastic panel possible here. But my name is Raven Dane. I do know about fairies and fae because I use them in every single book that I write, except my dark fantasy series, which has no supernatural at all, so a bit of a contradiction there. So that's the reason why I'm here. I'm also my first time moderating, so I've been on panels for donkey's years, but first time moderating, so if I make a mistake, I have a wingman here, the very lovely Jaine, who has done lots of moderating, and she'll kick me in the ankles or pinch me in the shins or something if I'm doing it all wrong. But some of our guests won't need any introduction, because if you don't know who Seanan McGuire is and Jim Butcher, by this stage you should have been horsewhipped. You've probably been in the bar for the whole weekend. But I have other lovely guests here. I have Benedict Jacka, who I'd like to introduce. And he's another fantasy writer. It's a sci-fi fantasy?
Urban fantasy.
Urban fantasy, thank you. Unfortunately, Wikipedia isn't always the best source of things. Sorry. Susan Bartholomew, a lovely lady next to me. She's another one who's a fantasy writer, and her latest book is all about fairies, and I'm sure we'll get a chance to learn about. Jaine, who's no stranger to panels and things. She's a fantastic writer, fantastic author. And she's here because she has a different aspect on the fae. She has sci-fi fae. So we've got a lovely range of views about fairies here. And to kick off, I'd just like everybody to raise their hands if they believe in fairies. Just me then? Okay. Right, so what I'd like to start off is go to the panel to say what they think of as fairies, whether they say interdimensional beings or something that they've created totally themselves. So if we just work our way down the table, we'll start with Benedict.
Okay, no pressure.
Yes, on the end.
My fault, I guess. I suppose that I mostly associate them with old world European folklore. I used to read a lot of children's fantasy books growing up. Actually, I read pretty much every children's fantasy book I could get when I was growing up. And I mostly came across them in the context of old stories that had been modernised, I suppose. A lot of them tended to have Scottish or Celtic influences in one way or another. Oddly enough, I tended not to associate them with the fantasy books I read, even though there were links with that. I thought I was associated them more with the old folklore of the creature you don't give a ride to on the back of your horse because you can't get it off, and the red knots that you hang over your door to avoid the wrong sort of guests coming in, and those kinds of things.
Jim?
Well, I had the misfortune of my first fairy was Tinkerbell, and that gives you that image that sticks with you for a long time. So I was startled when, as an older child, I was reading other books, and fairies turned out to be something quite different. For me, the fairies I always are the real image of fairies that I always keep with me now are essentially the inhabitants of Narnia. Good and bad, which was one thing, because it's like there's evil ones too. I really think that the cruelest representation of the Winter Court I've ever seen, and that's a theme that kind of goes through a lot of fairy lore, is the court that's around Jadis in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And that's always kind of been, that's where my association, where my interest in fairies started, was there. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I sort of started putting it together as I went along. That was my introduction to them.
2 words: otherworldly tricksters. And I kind of in my head distinguish between fairies, which is the Tinkerbell type one, and fae, because it's got A-E just think that's a cool way of spelling things. Incredibly shallow of me. And I find it fascinating that every culture has an equivalent folklore of the otherworldly tricksters, the folk under the hill, the people you never quite see at the corner of your eye. And obviously, mine's Northern European tradition, but I'm fascinated by the fact that it's everywhere.
Well, when a colleague at first asked me what was I doing over Easter, and I told her I was coming here. I said, I'm going to be on 2 panels. One is about Game of Thrones, and the other one is about fairies. And she said, oh, 2 very different age groups then. And she was so wrong. And she was so wrong, because if I had to go up against, oh, I don't know, Tywin Lannister, dragons, whatever, or fairies, oh, I'd pick the Lannisters any time because it would be easier. So, the fairy that I'm particularly writing about in the book I'm writing at the moment is Melusine. I don't know how many people know about Melusine, but she's a fairy, and she is a real mythological or legendary fairy who, I mean, certainly in the 12th century, which is the period I'm writing in, was held to have really existed. And she could take 2 forms. She could be an incredibly beautiful woman, or she could be a giant winged serpent. And she had incredible magic powers. She had amazing magic powers. So pretty much in the book, no one can really stand against her with magic. She tops them all in magic, and that is a fairy.
So I went to the University of California, Berkeley, to study folklore for 4 years, and we actually had entire courses that were just folklore majors arguing about what is a fairy. And when I say arguing, I mean that at one of them, Patrick actually barricaded himself in the corner of the room with chairs and screamed at us all in Welsh for an hour. They were frequently multilingual because we figured out very quickly that there is no watershed if the teachers don't know what you're calling each other. And we never sorted out the question. It is not a question that is answerable in a short form any more than what is air. The Fae are the Fae. You recognize them when you meet them. Now, you probably recognize them because they've just stolen your firstborn, your cow, and your skin. But you're going to know when that's what you're going up against. And unfortunately, this is an area where I actually get scholastic and reductive, so that's my answer, is the Fae are the Fae, and trying to define them in human terms is not going to work out so well.
We've got quite a wide selection of representation here. We have, you live in Australia now, Seanan? No. Wikipedia again! Wikipedia says I live in Australia? Did Wikipedia pay my moving costs? I think they will totally do that. I think they will pay to relocate all my stuff. I think they will do now. No, sorry. As soon as I heard your voice, I realised that they were wrong. You know. So we've got 2 representatives from America, and we've got English and British people here.
Actually, I'm half Australian, so maybe.
And also,
I should have gone to Specsavers. My background is very, very much Celtic Twilight. My mother is Irish and my father is Welsh, so I was sort of brought up in the She and Welsh Fae and stuff like that. I just wondered whether any of the authors here have drawn from inspiration from other mythos, beyond the Northern European Celtic mythos, or any ideas with the fairies and fae?
It is very hard to draw from most mythos and make them fae without being enormously culturally disrespectful. Yeah. You pull from an area where the spirits, the elemental tricksters, as she said, are connected directly to a deity or deities, especially if it's a deity or deities that still have living worshippers in the world. You are insulting another culture by absorbing it into an essentially European mythos. And it is very delicate ground. Like, that is not, you can do it, obviously. I'm never going to tell anyone what to write, but folklorically speaking, that is very delicate ground, and that is generally considered kind of, well, you here's a revolutionary idea. You could not.
Just because you can do something doesn't mean you ought to, like in science, yeah?
Yeah.
Oh, well, actually, Melusine is from a French tradition, but since the book, most of what I write is set in England, I've been using maybe Cornish, and I've also been taking it out to the legendary world of Lyonesse, but this one is set partly in France, and I've actually only ever been to Paris, but I make it up as I go along using the internet, I'm afraid.
Nothing wrong with that.
So,
Apart from Wikipedia.
yeah, maybe. But,
Yeah,
I do try and do a bit of research, so I know more or less what I'm talking about, and I have looked at historical sources as well for this.
one of the great things about writing science fiction is you get to make shit up without having to refer to anything. So I try to distill the essence of the traditional fair folk in my issue, who are sort of aliens. So I guess I'm only drawing on the Northern European tradition, but very much the elvish, in fact, disparagingly called space elves by one reviewer. They were insulting me, but I was actually quite complimented. I wouldn't feel comfortable taking something from somebody else's culture. I have used other cultures in my books, and I've always been very nervous of it, but I've shied away from the spiritual aspect and made sure there's somebody from that culture that can read it and tell me not to do the wrong thing. So definitely I would shy away with the play.
Oh, I steal things from everywhere. I will appropriate awesome wherever I find it. If I think it's going to make a good story, it's going to be fun to read, I will grab that and try and work it into what I'm doing. You have to understand, I'm an American and I come from a culture where appropriation is kind of what we do. And there's a long-standing tradition of the idea of the melting pot in America, where you take the finest parts of cultures, especially their good food, and try and make it part of your own. So you'll be dealing with, when I'm writing, I'll be dealing with, I'm dealing with fairies this week, and this chapter I'm dealing with, Welsh, Celtic, Irish fairies. Next time I'm dealing with this other cool mythological monster that I read about from elsewhere in the world, and I'm gonna have to associate them with the court in some way, even if it's only to have them standing to one side and sneering at it. But again, though, I mean, I'm not really trying to write everybody's mythos as it exists. I'm trying to write it as it exists in my story world. So there I am God, and that's the only place I can be. It's probably why I became a writer in the first place. So.
Yeah, I guess I'm going to go in the make shit up faction, since honestly, I mean, I get stuff from absolutely everywhere. Stuff I read, books, movies, computer games, random stuff on the internet, Wikipedia articles. Half the time I can't even remember where the hell some mythological creature came from in the first place. And when I did get it, it was probably something that was copied from someone else and copied from someone else. So after a certain point, if you don't even pretend to be remotely accurate to real life in the first place, then it takes a lot of the pressure off. You get to just say that, well, I'm creating this alternate universe and everything is this way, and usually by the time the stuff I use gets in there, it's been shredded and distilled and multiple copied from so many places anywhere that most people would probably have trouble figuring out where it came from in the first place. So.
That seems to give an enormous amount of freedom. I think the Jaine and the sci-fi mythos, it's yours. You created it. You can make your own things and do your own way. You haven't got the baggage of having the Celtic mythos or anything else. People, you are free to do what you like. Again, I was wondering about visuals, how much visuals impact things. I mean, fairies have gone through a whole transition, haven't they, over the years? We had this sort of, the grim fairy tales and sort of the dark creatures that obviously had a resonance going right back into prehistory. But we have then gone into the sort of Victorian sentimental times with Arthur Ruckman and all the pretty flower fairies and things like that, which we still have today. except in one of my books where they're pretty flower fairies are Ladettes, they get drunk on lager and pick fights with Vikings. And then the whole Victoria, and then we sort of got into the Brian Frow time where the fairies started getting a bit more spiky, a bit more sinister, a bit more dark forces, and then of course in modern Hollywood we've got the fantastic fairies of Del Toro, with Pan's Labyrinth and Hellboy 2, where they are very much dark, strange little creatures that you wouldn't want to meet in a dark night. I just wondered if any of the panel have any any outside influence of the artwork over the years that's affected their writing at all.
Well,
it's all your own mind.
If you're talking about art, you can look at pictures like Richard Dadd's The Fairy Fellow's Masterstroke, which just presents this whole fairy world. I don't know if anyone's actually seen this. Look it up on the internet. It's great. That's one that immediately came to mind.
Very intricate world he created. Yeah. Paul Chak went a bit.
I think he did.
Yeah. But no, incredibly detailed world. Again, very, very off-worldly. So if that leads into another question I was going to ask, a lot of modern fairy programs. The fairies are very much in at the moment. There's always these phases with any sort of media things, as Jim will know more than any of us will know. With a lot of fairies and things and witches and things, they're very much human in appearance, but they don't seem to change into another form, which a lot of the original, like the she, which give a visual, any visual sort of impact they want. They might appear as a beautiful girl, or they might appear as as a flying serpent. Is that something you think about when you create a figure? Are they meant to be human? Are they meant to but for play, or are they just an illusion?
Mine are definitely human, but I'm very interested in the beauty and danger thing. They are very uber beautiful, very dangerous women, and men are a bit stranger. But I love the idea of the transformation stuff, but I've never really used it, perhaps, so I should. I think that's probably a key point with Fae, the fact that they can be more than one thing.
Yeah, I think the times I've used it, I tend to go the opposite way. What always interested me about Fae and similar supernatural creatures was the idea that they might look human, but they are completely alien. And essentially, particularly with regard to morality, that they run off some kind of moral code that is something you're absolutely not going to expect, and something that makes it very hard to deal with them, because even the most basic assumptions that you normally have about humans just don't apply. I think that was what I always tended to find most interesting about it. The idea that they're not so much playing on a good and evil scale, that they've got their own totally separate moral compass that looks completely incomprehensible to humans at first glance, but makes absolute sense to them, to the point where they usually can't understand why you see anything particularly wrong with the whole eating your firstborn child alive thing. Because, hey, that's just how we do it around here. I mean, we've been doing it for all eternity. No one else has complained. What are you objecting to?
It's the same in my book where Melusine actually can't understand why a woman has 7 children and can't give Melusine one of them. How selfish.
I'm going to jump back a little bit to the previous question, because one of my favorite fairy characters that I've seen recently in the media is the Joker from the second to the most recent Batman movies. I mean, because he's an evil fairy from top to bottom. Even to the point of his entrance onto the stage, and his entry action where the camera just sort of pans up, and all these other people are doing things when they to come onto the stage, and the Joker just sort of appears like he's popped up out of the ground, and then from then on he proceeds to engage in equivalent actions of shape shifting. Because he can, even though he's green and got the bizarre scars and the weird makeup, he can put on a dress and walk right into a hospital and nobody knows he's there. And then proceeds to obsessively pursue his own moral code even though it makes no sense, even when he explains it, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Until he gets to the part where he says, "I'm just a dog chasing a car. I wouldn't know what to do with it if I caught it." and you begin to see that this character is he's this force of anarchy that you're not going to ever understand. You see him giggling at the end. He's been defeated, and he seems to be absolutely delighted because he's going to be doing this dance with Batman for all eternity, and loves it. And so he's really he's my favorite evil fairy that I've seen lately, because that's what he is at the end of the day.
Sean, sorry.
What?
It's a great big long panel, isn't it?
Yeah, it's quite long.
Yeah, we were just gosh, I lost me now.
Well, I knew what the question was. I had nothing to contribute.
I do not believe that for 1 minute. No, we were talking about human appearance, and
They have those sometimes.
yes, yeah.
Sometimes they don't.
Well, it's like Fae are Fae, and that's what they are.
Well, I really don't have anything to contribute here. I'm good at talking when I have something to say.
Yeah, I mean, with my own stuff, the she, because I borrow, especially my latest, I borrow heavily on my own background, Irish background, and I remember, back home, and there's a building. We got a lot of foreign investment coming into Ireland. A lot of German builders coming in, creating factories, and they could not believe that we would stop them from developing something because there was a fairy mound in the way or a fairy tree, and they all thought we were sort of savages and weird. But it goes very, very deep. These are otherworldly beings. They've got their own life, their own sort of separate existence, and they need to be respected. They can be. They don't judge things on human ways because they are not human. So, you've got to respect the shining ones, or else, So it goes very deep in our sort of souls. And then this is why we get very cross with the stupid little leprechauns with orange beards and green ill-fitting suits that come out every St. Patrick's Day. Leprechauns are tricksters, and they're not little men with ill-fitting suits and orange chin beards. So yeah, I've got a bit of a pedant on that subject.
I do wonder if the sort of tweeification of Fae, and that's a word now.
Tweeification.
Officially, word now, yeah.
That's an excellent word. We're writers, we can do that.
The tweeification, your little leprechauns or Tinkerbell, and I think that might be a human reaction to things that really do scare us, because the Fae are scary. But if you give them little high-pitched voices and stupid hats, they're less scary. And I think we'll do that. Well, it annoys us because we like the scary ones. We embrace the scary. But most people that we meet on the streets that aren't at this convention, as in the reaction that you had about fairies, it's like, oh yeah, it's just for kids. It's like, don't really think about this aspect of human nature, because I think this is fulfilling a human need that we have to be scared and to think there's something around the corner, just out the corner of our eyes. So I don't believe in them, but I believe in the need to believe, if you see what I mean.
Well, just the term fairies is an ongoing attempt to belittle something we're afraid of.
Exactly.
You don't refer to them by name because that attracts their attention. They're like Voldemort.
Yeah.
You mustn't say their name. But that's why we call them the shining ones, and the gentry, and the fair folk, and the ones at the bottom of the garden. We don't call them fairies because that's like going up to the Hell's Angel that's guarding your door and saying, "Hey, Bitsy!" You've just to their face insulted them, and they might come and take your tongue. So when we really started calling them fairies, that was sort of a cultural statement of we are not afraid anymore. We do not have to be afraid. And there's a lot of really great scholarship about the introduction of the word fairies and the resistance to the word fairies on the part of parents for a while, because they were happy to have squeaky-voiced little mouse-sized girls in flower dresses dancing in the nurseries. That's great. That's iconography. That's not necessarily something that the fairies will notice. The fair folk are not that interested in what humans do because all of our art sucks. But when we started calling them fairies, there were a lot of parents that were like, are really? You want us to do what? Because honestly, decorating your child's nursery in Tinkerbell and then telling them about the fairies is like hanging out a big dinner bell and ringing it a lot. You don't want children.
how much do you think House of Mouse has been responsible for that? Because you know, it's a popular culture, Tinkerbell and all the fairies and Cinderella and all the fairy princesses and things. Do you think Disney has had a major impact on this sort of taming the fairy?
Well, it kind of depends on at which point Disney you look at, because Disney who did Tinkerbell is also the Disney who did Maleficent, you know, with the hobgoblins pouring into the basement and so on.
That maybe sort of the evolution, the early stages is very twee.
Disney's Tinkerbell is absolutely based on Barry's Peter and Wendy. The tweeification, the shrinking down, and the simplification began with Grimm and just continued from there. You go back to the pre-Grimm stories, you go back to the untranslated stories, you go back to anything from the era before we said, hey, let's call them fairies, that won't piss them off, and they are much bigger and meaner. Disney just sort of put a face on Tinkerbell. Barry put Tinkerbell in the mouse-sized body.
No, it just seems to be a Victorian thing that they were so interested in industrializing, maybe with the Industrial Revolution as well. Things had to become more mechanistic, more understandable, and anything that wasn't understandable was kind of shoved into a corner and given a label.
It's interesting also, you know, the early Victorian, late Victorian fairy pictures, of course, so much interest, and you've got Conan Doyle believing in them, and they're very much pretty little girls in pretty little dresses and gossamer wings, which they were, you know, very happy to embrace as possibly what fairies were like. A lot of people believed in those pictures, but in reality, of course, you know, it's the last thing they'd be looking like. They still wanted to trick us, of course.
Are we going to talk about sex at some point?
Let's get stuck in. Fire away, Jenny.
The Ivory Watershed. Like quite a bit.
Yeah, it might be a bit early. But that's another aspect that I think the Victorians were deliberately trying to diffuse, is the sexual aspect of the fairies as sexual predators, which is the one I find fascinating in views. And by making them twee, making it something that's associated with kiddies, you've stepped away from that. I think you've stepped away from that. But I think they were very much about sex. I mean, I love the legend of Tam Lin. Yeah, you just thought we could get an easy shag and land to you.
I have Seanan as a main character in the latest book. She is a fairy queen who used to love human bards, human singers, and she could kidnap them and keep them in tin and nog, but she would actually drain them of all life. You know, they live a long time, but by the time they're finished, they're just dried out husks, and she'd abandon them, find another beautiful harpist or another beautiful singer. So, again, very much predator. Any other songs? Are your fairies sexy?
Harry actually, Harry Dresden actually does when he seals a compact with Mab to be the Winter Knight. He has sex with her, although he never really thinks of it as sex or refers to it as sex when it sort of crosses his mind, which is in moments that it's disturbing. He just sort of thinks of it as the Mab experience. You can't have sex with a thunderstorm. You can just survive what happens to you. And that's sort of how he regards it. But yeah, I mean, depending on which fairy you run into, that might be something that is very much a focus of what they do, especially with the she. Or it might be something that just does not matter to them at all. It could, if you start talking to some of the darker fairies, you start talking to the goblins, and violence is their sex, and that's how they get. They indulge that need. But yeah, I mean, you've got to have that because it sells really well.
I think if you've got these fairies that are capable of taking what form they want, and obviously when people see them, they always see them, if they see them in human form at all, as a beautiful woman or an extremely attractive man, and if they're going to present themselves that way, I'm sure there's a reason that they're going to want to taste the pleasures that having that human body can bring them.
Many of my fairies think they're sexy. It's a good job. I don't write sex. That is not I also come from the place of Tamlin. That was my thesis topic. And for me, Tamlin is not a sexy story. It's a story about what happens when the Fae and the humans cross over, and it's subjugation and rape and unpleasantness. So sexy is not my focus. I don't sexy so much. It's not my ballgame.
Mm-hmm. How are we doing for time?
Yeah, where's our little magic thing?
Yeah. Because we have such a huge crowd. I think we have a lot of opinions here.
Well, do we want to take audience questions?
I think we should.
Yay!
Okay, folks. Sean and I both agree. This is like being on stage. We have lit in the spotlight, our jazz hands, but we cannot see you. Okay, so
our magic thing is back.
I'll do my best. Hands over there. Sorry, it's just going to be the hand. It's not going to be the gentleman with the red shirt and the pink cravat. Like they do on question time. Sorry.
Are the Fae tied to a specific location, or have they perhaps the Irish Fae migrated to Australia and America with the people who believe in them?
Ooh, big question.
It depends on the tradition. If you're looking at something like a Vila, which is going to be bound to a mountain, or a Sylph or an Undine, which are going to be bound to their respective water sources, then you do have geographical restrictions. I firmly believe you could transplant dryads. You could have a large nursery whose entire job is just uprooting dryads and taking them elsewhere, and getting them out of the path of oncoming construction. But there's no good reason that non-geographically linked Fae couldn't move around, and in fact probably would once we started putting railways freaking everywhere. You put a giant iron railway through my living room. I'm moving to America. And at that point, you're going to have a wide dispersion of population, which is more fun, honestly, than clumping everyone together, hemmed in by iron and slowly dying.
No, I don't think they have the ways of moving around the world that our kind of people have. They move around the world in different ways, I would have thought. So whether they're here, whether they're America or Australia or in Asia or wherever, I think they just go where they want to go, globally.
Yeah, I think, as Sean says, some of them are associated with the location, but most fairies, you can't see them anywhere. They're out at the edge of your perception, so when you go somewhere, why wouldn't they come with you? They'll be unseen wherever you are. I think we take them with us.
Well, if you're the one writing the fair, you can pretty much make them do whatever you want. But, yeah, I think the way I did it in my stories, a few of them have moved, but then in my books, the magical creatures, a lot of them are approaching extinction anyway, since the humans have been wiping them out for a while. So some of them managed to adapt, and those ones probably did move to America or whatever. The other ones mostly got enslaved or wiped out.
Right. Oh. Hand over there, lady there. Sorry. Yes.
One of the things that I remember from the sort of fairy stories is very much that time dilation aspect. If you go to visit the fair, when you come back, the time frame is different. Time runs differently if you go to the fair. Has anybody used that or thought about that?
Yeah, I have. We'll be doing that. The sequel to the one I just done. My main character gets taken up by the sheep, and they all think he's dead and gone, but he isn't. Because the whole time scale thing. But I always think of them as interdimensional elementals anyway. So they, quantum physics has opened up a whole wide world of imagination. There's lots of parallel universes and lots of extra dimensions and stuff. We're only just touching the tip of the iceberg. So why couldn't there be a Fae dimension, the different time scale? It's sort of getting, the more quantum physics discovers, the more incredible the whole universe is. So yeah, I think the time portal thing is very, very useful and an interesting thing to pursue.
Yeah, I've used it. Murphy actually lost her job because of that effect. There was an ongoing investigation that she was in charge of, and she went off the Arctis tour with Harry, and was gone for a few hours and about a day and a half. inexplicably vanishing from an ongoing investigation for that long is frowned upon by those pesky real world people. So it didn't work out. It didn't work out so well for her. But for me, that's a function of partly it's a function of how much time do they want to go by while they grab you away, because they have a certain amount of influence over that. So you might go and spend some time there and be back within seconds, or you might go with them and show up again 40 years later, and that's one of the things that they can change around. And you know, it's one of the fun things about it, because you just never know.
Well, if I ever need a character to disappear for 7 years, I know what to do. Thank you very much.
That's at the back there. Sorry, it's just really bad. You're just a mass of black faces and darkness and shadows. You might all be Fae.
You still have skin.
So I can't hear, sorry.
Hello?
There you are.
One of the differences between people and monsters or forces of nature is that people can make choices. As an example, I'm thinking of a BSFA nomination here. If you ask a human being a question, they can choose to lie or give you a straight answer or whatever. But with fairies, in this example, it seems like giving a tricksy answer is hardwired into their DNA. Do you regard fairies as having capability to change, or are their natures fixed within themselves?
Shannon?
Well, you used a word there, which is people. And it's an interesting assumption that humans make, using humans to describe us, where anything that is not human, even in a work of fiction, cannot be a person. Anything that is a people, that has intelligence and free will, is going to be able to make its own choices to some degree or another. There are folks that would say humans are hardwired to destruction and knocking things over, but for the most part, we're not hitting each other with chairs right now. So I think if you're writing truly intelligent Fae, if you are writing Fae people, then of course they will have free will and the ability to make choices and the ability to change. They may trend toward what looks like hardwired wickedness, because they are working on an orange and blue morality rather than a black and white morality. And they don't understand why, after you said, I wish the goblins would come and take my baby brother away right now, you got pissed because they didn't. You have introduced a contract. I wish the goblins would come and take my baby brother right now. Okay, here are the goblins right now taking the... Why are you mad? Why are you following us and breaking all our stuff? We did exactly what you asked. And so that seems evil because we're looking at our black and white morality. We're standing in one model. The Fae are in a different model. They can make their choices. They can make their decisions. We see it throughout folklore. We see it throughout fairy tales. We see it throughout the popular ballads. We touched on Tamlin. There's a bit at the end of the ballad where the Fae Queen says, had I but known Tamlin, I'd have done all these horrible things to you. But I didn't know, so I didn't do it. There's a variation where she curses the heck out of Janet. She's just like, you're sticking around till I get back because we are going to have some words. And those are clearly the choices of a thinking creature. Now, once you move into monsters, non-thinking creatures, you have to ask yourself, does a bear make choices? Or does a bear just eat me because I got too close to its cubs? Well, does a Kelpie make choices? Or did I, as the thinking being, make the choice to get on the Kelpie's back, and now I get to enjoy what the Kelpie thinks of as a nice lunch? You know, so people is a very loaded word when we're talking fantasy, because so many of the non-humans are people.
Anybody else want to contribute?
I don't think I can improve. I don't think I can improve on that answer.
Absolutely,
Anyway.
Shannon, it was a fantastic answer. Thank you.
Turn those to
Right,
10.
what else have we got? Wasn't that it? Yes?
Hello. If nobody minds, I'd like to say a word or two about Tinkerbell, because she always gets the blame. As far as I know, Barry actually knew quite a lot about historical folklore. I could be wrong, because I haven't researched him, but I believe this is the case. And people don't necessarily read what they're reading carefully enough. I'm talking here about the actual book of Peter and Wendy, not the play, not Disney. First of all, we all know that Tinkerbell is a murderous little pre-watershed because she tries to kill Wendy because she's obsessed with Peter. But that's loyalty. The other thing we have to remember is that she's called Tinker. That's her family name. He actually comments on it somewhere. She is a suburban chick, but she comes from a family of metal workers. And that, in the beliefs of Victorian, or whenever it was a big dictionary, goes a long, long way back into history, right back into the
Magic of Iron. Magic of Iron.
Yeah, so the whole idea, as far as I'm concerned, that elves and fairies are allergic to iron is just total rubbish because it doesn't accord with anything I know, but that's just my view, historically. But Tinkerbell is Belle the Tinker.
Again, I think it's Disney turning into this little pretty thing, and I think her origins and her backstory.
They turned her into the pretty thing as well, but Barry knew different.
Yeah,
Disney made her as Barry described her. And she's a murderous little pre-watershed in the Disney movie as well.
Yeah.
Disney did not sanitize Tinkerbell. Parents retelling the story to their children and complaining to Disney sanitized Tinkerbell. That was when Disney was still not afraid to kill Bambi's mom. Like they did not clean Tinkerbell.
Right, next question. Yeah, sorry, this is a nightmare. You can see people.
You've got someone in the second row.
We'll try and get everybody in, so don't worry. We've got another quarter now. So.
Somewhat on this topic, I know that Jim and Benedict have both, in their own ways, twisted those tropes that we're talking about, or taken a different slant on them. And I'm thinking particularly of Toot Toot, and I'm also thinking of Arachne as that our expectations of those types of fae or fairies or supernatural beings you put on their heads. Now, was that something that you set out to do, or did they develop? Jim and Benedict.
No, I mean they changed and grew as I went along. Toot Toot was, when I designed him, I wanted him to be sort of an ongoing mural of how the Fae are and how they change and how they behave and how it changes over time. Because I knew that the she had to come from somewhere, and I had to figure out where does it come from, and you can see Toot Toot's evolution as he takes on more and more responsibility and has more influence on the world around him. He's getting taller and taller, and you can kind of see the direction he's going and why he's getting there. But initially, I don't think that was until book 2 or 3 that I decided I wanted to do that with him. Initially, I just wanted to have this insane little guy who might pick up a box cutter. So.
Yeah, for my part, well, the thing is, when I wrote the first book, The Fated, I didn't really have very much of a long-term plan in mind, or any plan, since it was the 10th book I'd written, and the last 4 had all gotten rejected one after the other. So by the time I got to this one, I was kind of just going, well, it's not like it's ever going to get published anyway, so screw it, let's just have some fun and put in some random stuff. And I figured that, okay, I want my character to have a friend who's a magical creature. Let's go with something that most people would find completely scary and horrific, because it would be fun. What's something that people are really scared of? Spiders. Hey, and they'd be even more scared of a gigantic spider the size of a minivan. Yes. So then I'll actually make her a really nice character, and we'll see if it works. Apparently it did, because she's, when I read reviews and so on, consistently she sees to be one of the favourite characters.
Oh yeah, she's one of the nicest people in the books. There are just so many jerks running about, and you're one of the very few people you feel that Alex can rely on to actually be his friend. Is this horrible monster the size of a minivan? So.
I think they're going to find our question for us. So watch out for the hard-working, fit young lady with a mic.
Going back to the sanitised fairies,
can't you see how easy it was for the Fae to corrupt our image of them so they could get us easier? Vampires are quite easily a Fae that has stepped out of the shadows. They want us to like them. They really want us to let them get close because we are tasty and go well with ketchup.
Why do you think we've started replacing everything with plastic? That's the Fae going, hey, you liar, plastic's better.
I'm having this idea about how evil Walt Disney really was then and what he was really trying to do. How he was really the Antichrist. That was out loud, wasn't it? It's been a long weekend.
Aside on that.
Nope.
No. Well, yeah, it's the Fae, you know. My understanding, a lot of the Fae like glamour, and that's the kind of belief and what the people invest in it. So I've been throwing around an idea in my head that the whole proliferation in cheap animation, computer games, and everything else is a great way of getting their own brand across and generating that glamour that they subsist on. So how do people look at that as a model for future stories?
You've just given us your idea now, haven't you?
Yeah.
Too late, you said it.
Very dangerous. I think Fae and technology is an interesting area, but I'm too brain fried to go into it, so if anyone else wants to, feel free. But yeah, the relationship with technology, quite an ambivalent one. Sean was saying about replace everything with plastic. The fact that they are high-tech and low-tech at the same time, certainly in the Northern European tradition. You know, they make beautiful things, and yet they're also foiled by iron. Yeah.
Fortunately, I write historical fantasy, so I don't even have to consider plastic, never mind this kind of problem.
One of the frustrating things about writing a long series is that you come up with so many different ideas as you're kind of building the story world that are just never going to fit into the book that you're trying to write. And in my head, one of the things that Toot and Zalord's Guard do is play Xbox, like fanatically. And so you'll have a couple of them playing, and because they have to cooperate to use the Xbox thing because they're so tiny. And then one of them will be standing by on the headset to be able to yell insulting things at people online. But they're really good at it because they're tiny and they're quick and they've got amazing reflexes and everything. But it's a crew served weapon, while they're playing Call of Duty. Look, Leonard, I told you to hit the bumper. No.
I hope that makes into a short story one of these days.
That'd be awesome.
How are we doing? Where's the microphones? Gentlemen,
how do people feel that? How did the panel feel that the Fae would interact with modern law? I mean, would the RSPCA be concerned with the fate of Kelpies?
Yeah, that stumped us.
But probably yes.
Yeah, for me, Mab's human cover is she's a lawyer. She could show up as she's actually a licensed attorney and can show up and do things if she wants to. She doesn't often choose to do that, but occasionally it's useful to be able to walk into a courtroom because law is something that I think one of the defining attributes of many of the Fae is that they have this completely rigid code, and they understand codes. And even if we don't understand the code that they're behaving by, they adhere to it, and they're going to stick to whatever it is that they believe in, even if it makes no sense to us. It's clearly it's of paramount importance to them. So they have kind of an innate understanding of the law. A lot of Fae do, and would take. Many of them would be able to manipulate it just excellently. Many of them would see it as a great amusement to pervert it, And then there's going to be the wilder aspects of those characters who just don't care or who take great joy in flaunting it. But they're all going to be aware of it and understand that it's there and that it exists, and that there is a force that the law itself has a force that the Fae have to interact with. There is a kind of a reality and a kind of gravity that goes along with law that, if nothing else, the Fae are aware of, and generally will show respect or at least glee in using for their own ends.
Yeah, I think they're big on contracts. Well, then contracts are important. If you make a deal with a fairy, you'd better make sure you stick to the absolute letter of it, because otherwise they're going to know, they're going to find out, they're going to do something about it. Definitely, it's contract, really.
I'm sure they were saying earlier, with the baby situation, if you say, take my baby, hope the elves take the baby away, it's a contract. So, so that's interesting aspect. Probably got time for one or two more. We could go on all day, actually, because it's a fantastic subject.
I want to ask about the power and the magic of Fae, because there's surely a class where you have all they have is glamour and the ability to move between worlds. And what powers do you give your interpretations of Fae, and is it something different if they've got magic other than the glamour and the ability to go in and out of fairyland or whatever?
Mine have psionics because I like science fiction. That can manifest as glamour. So a lot of the things that the classic Fae can do, my she can do, but it's mind power stuff, and that's the women, and the men can do the movement between worlds thing. There's quite a lot of sexual dimorphism there.
I think the way I tend to do it is that their power, it's kind of as you say, their powers might not sound all that impressive, not always at least, if you describe them in the abstract. The advantage they have in my setting is that since their magic's much more inherent to them than the magic of humans is, and it means that from the perspective of humans, they get to break the rules in some minor ways. I guess the model would be something like with a lot of games, role-playing games and computer ones. There's generally a very laid-out system that the players are allowed to use. Then you run into various creatures, non-player characters or monsters that can, from the point of view of the players break the rules. They're just running under a different system, but it means they have some advantages as well as disadvantages that go along with it.
Yeah, for me, the whatever magic the Fae have is kind of intimately tied in with the code that drives them. So if you're a goblin, part of your code is sort of this predatory credo. That is a part of their essential nature, and so the magic that they have supports this kind of behavior, and they're very good at going places unseen and showing up suddenly and viciously, and that's just sort of their powers support what it is that they live for. That there's a certain kind of purpose to their being that influences everything they do, and also influences the kind of things they can do and are good at. Mab is a ruling Fae, and so she has appropriately scaled, global superpowers type magical powers. But when you get to somebody that is much lower on the totem pole, like Tutu, his powers are much less evolved than that. He can do this flying thing, and he can go back and forth between the Never Never and the mortal world. And other than that, he doesn't really have a whole lot, because he's just a little guy. So not nearly as much purpose, not nearly as much power.
Nowhere near time.
Yes. Well, it shows what a fantastic panel it has been. We've only just literally scratched the top of the iceberg with the whole subject of Fae, and interdimensional beings, elementals, whatever you want to call them. I'd just like to thank our fantastic panel. It's been a real honour to be on the stage with everybody, with Benedict and Jim, and Jaine, Susan and Seanan. And I'd like to everybody give their appreciation to our fantastic panel.